Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitch TV, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Got a lot to discuss today, a lot going on with the NFL, Tom Brady, Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson. Even airs some grievances. We never hear that. Some news with the NBA regarding the AllStar Game. Steph Curry says he's back and feeling the strongest that he's ever been. And of course, NBC Sports' Ben Cross will join the show at the bottom half of the hour. So, a lot to start with. And of course, I have to start with the fallout from the Super Bowl. A lot was said. A lot of chirping going on, especially with Tom Brady and Tyrann Mathieu. Listen, these are both fiery, competitive guys. Not surprised that Tom Brady went out of his way. He texted Tyrann Mathieu after the Super Bowl loss and was highlighting how this isn't who I really am. My emotions were boiling over, which makes complete sense. And Tyrann Mathieu even came out and said, I've never seen this side of him before. And when you see a guy in Tom Brady who ran one of the slowest 40s ever chase after an opposing team's DB because something was chirped in his ear, you know that's something serious, right? That's the expectation. They're jawing, they're sparring at one another, they're up in each other's faces, yelling profanity-laced insults. And Tyrann Mathieu said something to Tom Brady and then started jogging off as if nothing's going to happen. Tom Brady chases after him, says, hold on a sec. You're not going to be able to get away with something like that. And so the ripple effect was that Tom Brady didn't want that to be the lasting impression, which I respect, and was something that you had to do. He called Mathieu the ultimate competitor, talked about how he watched him at LSU and has the ultimate respect for him, and that these are just two really competitive guys. But this is the interesting thing. It's interesting how our perceptions of altercations in sports have evolved over the years. Because when you look at sports about 30 years ago, fights, jarring, chirping was strongly encouraged, if not fantasized and praised when they happened. We saw us in hockey. Fans openly applaud fights that break out. The refs, for Christ's sake, step aside and allow the players to deliver a blow before they intervene. We see that happen all the time. In basketball, the Knicks and the Bulls had these epic fights. In the postseason, we saw the Detroit Pistons and the Indiana Pacers with Ron Artest and the Malice at the Palace. These things were encouraged. This type of activity was actually supported back then. And in today's climate, everything is so highly scrutinized, and we closely observe what everyone is doing, everyone's actions, everything that they're saying. And with the advent of technology, you've got different camera angles, enhanced quality of camera angles. We've got different types of microphones that pick up everything that you're saying, and they can see what words you're mouthing, right? We pick up every single thing and we scrutinize it till the death of it. And so what that means is that you have to be just extremely cognizant of what you're saying. And that's the only reason why a story like this is even a story. The fact that we're reporting that Tom Brady sent a text apology to Tyrann Mathieu, the only reason why it's even a story is because of the climate that we're in today, coupled with the political climate and the way that we view and treat race today. You have to be cognizant of everything that you're saying. And so when you see a white male and Tom Brady go up to an African-American player and Tyrann Mathieu, and Mathieu says that there's something that Brady screamed in his helmet that he won't repeat, naturally you infer that there's some racial connotation, some racial undertone. And that's the only reason why this is even a story. is because that's the society that we're in. And it makes complete sense. And again, when you see a guy in Brady literally go out of his way to sprint the fastest he has probably sprinted in over 5 years to chase down a younger Mathieu to get in the last word, and then you see Mathieu take the step back and react the way that he did, clearly something was said. We don't know what transpired in that conversation, but I do know this. We can't overblow. Like, I think that what happened is just overblown, and these guys were just caught up in the game. These are the ultimate competitors, and they're playing in the ultimate game. They're playing in the Super Bowl. That's it. That's all it is. This is for all the marbles. This is their game 7. You got one life in this game. And we just saw some of their emotions. We saw those emotions pouring out onto the field. Their temperatures boiled over a little bit. And that was it. But what's interesting is to see the backlash, the ramifications of this, the number of punitive punishments that are handed out when incidences like this transpire. That's what's the most interesting thing in looking at how the game's evolved and how sports have evolved. Now the leagues get involved, there are fines. Before, maybe you just toss them out of the game, you hold them back for a little bit, you get a couple different warnings. Not in today's climate. But this shouldn't really be a story. It's just the fact that you're involving 2 high-profile guys that were both really competitive, playing in the most competitive game of the year, and they're each trying to get an advantage and a leg up over the other. So it's not surprising that in such a testosterone-filled game that involves so much physicality, you're seeing emotions boil over. That's all that this was. There are other stories, however, that may not just be this is all that it was. And of course, the one franchise that always seems to be intermingled with these conflicts with players is the Dallas Cowboys. And it was reported a couple days ago that the Cowboys and Dak Prescott were again engaged in long-term contract discussions, but haven't progressed, which isn't surprising because they haven't progressed over the last 3 years. But it's interesting because when I saw this story, one of the things that I thought about was those times when you go to a food truck with some friends and you're waiting in line and you see your friends order some food ahead of you and sounds fantastic. You love all the ingredients. The item looks great on the menu. And you go up to the cashier and you say, yeah, I'll have what they're having. And as you're taking out your cash or your credit card, your debit card, whatever, to pay for the meal, you see the dish that they collect and it looks like a Petri dish. So you say to yourself, as you're about to hand over your money to the cashier, actually, let me browse this menu a little bit. Let me take another glance at this, and you put your money right back into your pocket. This is the maneuver that the Cowboys just pulled with Dak Prescott. They're watching everything that's transpiring, not only in their division, in their conference, and they're trying to take a step back and objectively evaluate what they have moving forward, which is unfortunate for Dak Prescott. But you look at the Rams, clearly they feel like they overpaid for Jared Goff, and the ends didn't justify the means. So they traded him away. They just traded him away to the Detroit Lions at a hefty price to acquire Matthew Stafford. The Eagles are trying to shop Carson Wentz. Now, whether they have any takers, I don't know. They're now begging for even a first-round pick in return. So the Cowboys are in this situation where they're saying to themselves, we don't want to make the same mistakes as those two organizations have done. We don't want to be trapped in this contract that we can't get out of. And they saw the type of wrench that those contracts threw in those organizations' futures. Now, you could argue the Rams still at least reached a Super Bowl once with Jared Goff, so that's a justifiable contract. The Eagles had an MVP for one season with Wentz, and he did ultimately lead them to the best record in the NFC en route to a Super Bowl. So you could say that they justified it, but they signed those contracts and they gave out those contracts at the end of their third year in the league. And now Dak Prescott is the only quarterback out of that 2016 class that, one, hasn't been traded. Two, the franchise still believes in them to some degree. But three, hasn't been signed to a long-term deal yet. And this is all the backdrop and the context for what's about to happen. Because Jerry Jones, listen, the difference between the Rams situation, the Eagles situation, and the Cowboys situation is that Jerry Jones genuinely likes Dak Prescott. He's the consummate professional. He's had no off-the-field issues. He epitomizes what it means to be the face of a franchise. He's led the Cowboys to 2 division titles, 2-time Pro Bowler, a playoff victory. He's the winningest quarterback over the past 4 years in the NFC East. They genuinely like Dak, but the problem is they're only willing to spend a certain amount. And if it means exceeding a certain amount to retain Dak, they don't want to do that. And conversely, understandably, if you're Dak Prescott, you're saying to yourself, listen, I've made under $4 million the first 4 years in the NFL as the starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. I've played through my rookie contract. This was the first year that I even got one opportunity, and you signed me to the franchise tag. So I understand from Dak Prescott's perspective why it is that he's been kind of a little distant with the Cowboys. But right now, with all of that as the backdrop, it sets up this situation with the Cowboys where now they drop a preseason hype video. Apologies for the technical difficulty right there for a moment, but we're back. And all I was saying was that sets up the backdrop for the Cowboys dropping this preseason hype video, and they don't include the face of their franchise. Again, whether you consider Dak Prescott a star or not, that's irrelevant. Because what's undeniable is he's the quarterback of your team. And to me, it's both shameful, it's disgraceful, and quite frankly, it's petty. It's just petty. You literally are showcasing a preview of what your team's going to look like moving forward, and the one guy you don't even throw him in there, a guy that just suffered a devastating leg injury. He broke his entire ankle, missed this season, has displayed nothing but loyalty, nothing but professionalism, has carried himself well, has been the face of your franchise, and you don't even have the decency as an organization to include him in a preseason hype video? It's disgraceful. It's super petty. And I get it. There's this issue between the two of them, but to not even include the guy, it's just embarrassing. And I don't think that they're going to come to an agreement at any point. I truly don't believe that. I know that they're in discussions, and maybe he'll sign the franchise tag one more year for $37 million next year. But if they were to try and franchise him for a third year, it would hit about $50 million, which would devastate and cripple their entire cap situation. So unfortunately, I don't see this situation playing out very well, and probably Dak's going to be gone, which is a shame because if you're the Cowboys, you could really use someone like that. But again, the buck starts and stops with Jerry Jones, and I don't see him budging at all. I don't see him budging at all. Okay, transitioning to a guy that hasn't aired any grievances really throughout his entire career with the Seattle Seahawks is Russell Wilson, one of my favorite quarterbacks, one of the best people, just won the Walter Payton Award last week. Fantastic honor, University of Wisconsin grad. I like to consider him University of Wisconsin grad. Technically started at North Carolina State, but we'll gloss over that. And he, for the first time ever as a Seattle Seahawk, expressed public concerns and frustrations over the protection he was getting and for getting hit so many times. And even said in his quote, "I'm frustrated getting hit too much. I'm frustrated with that part of it. At the end of the day, you want to win." And so this is the first time that he's actually aired some displeasure with the organization. That's how concealed he's kind of been and how he's kind of closed off those opinions for so long. And finally, especially after watching what happened to Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs with their offensive line issues, he says, listen, I got to air out these grievances. And we're living in an age of NFL empowerment and player empowerment. Now, I will concede the NFL players are a little bit late to the party, juxtapose the NBA players that seem to have, for the most part, a larger impact, and they've got a more direct line to their commissioner to air out those grievances and to see results and to hold them more accountable. But we're starting to see NFL players, NFL star quarterbacks, just star players in general, feel this way and be more public about their frustrations. And it's understandable because Russell Wilson, he's been sacked 397 times, which according to ESPN is the most amount of times a guy has been sacked through his first 9 seasons since the NFL-AFL merger in 1970, which is hard to believe given that Randall Cunningham is the next one at 366 sacks through his first 5 seasons in the NFL. And so by acutely highlighting his frustrations, he's putting the Seattle Seahawks front office on notice that, hey, you need to adhere to what I'm saying and be proactive. Otherwise, we're going to have another Deshaun Watson situation on our hands. Not to the same degree, of course, because I think the Deshaun Watson situation, the way that the Texans organization, the ineptitude with which they have handled their situation, their star quarterback, is still befuddling because it just doesn't make any sense. You don't see this happen ever. And it also kind of elucidates the ramifications if you act in a perverse manner to your star quarterback. What can happen when you deliberately go behind his back, when you mistrust, and when you betray their trust? This is what can happen. Now, again, I'm not saying the Seattle Seahawks situation with Russell Wilson is the same or nearly as similar to that of the Houston Texans, but it's a slippery slope because one thing can lead to another and exacerbate something else. And the 2 other guys last year, so Russell Wilson last year was sacked 47 times. The 2 guys, the only 2 other guys that were sacked more than him last year, I'm sure you can take a guess: Carson Wentz and Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson 49 times, Carson Wentz 50 times. And Wentz was sacked 50 times and didn't even play the final 3 games of the year. Now, what's the nexus between those 2 quarterbacks? Well, they're faces of their franchise, either currently or at one point, who voluntarily and involuntarily are seeking asylum because they're disgruntled and their franchises either want to retain them or want to get rid of them. That's the commonality between those 2. And to the credit of the Seahawks, I will defend them on this regard. Again, according to a stat, they were 9th best in pass blocking win rate at 62% this past season and ranked 8th since 2017. So sometimes it indicates that some of these sacks are a little bit self-induced if you're Russell Wilson. Sure. But Wilson said, and I think this highlights just a bigger ongoing issue of wanting to have more say in the personnel decisions. Like guys like Peyton Manning, Tom Brady having some say. Not even Aaron Rodgers has been able to provide input all the time. Now, moving forward, I think he will. But it makes sense because NFL players should be able to command that type of respect. They should be able to share input in some of these decisions. Now, I'm not going to go as far as to say that under every circumstance you need to consult a decision with a player. Maybe not necessarily, but if it pertains to their side of the field, if you're the quarterback and you're thinking about drafting an offensive piece that could help them win, you're damn right they should be a part of that personnel decision. I'm not saying that they should have final say or final cut, but their input should be taken seriously and should merit some consideration. If for nothing else, from a posterity standpoint, you want to at least appease the guy to the point where he at least feels like you valued his opinion at all. So I just think there needs to be a little bit more ongoing dialogue between the players and the front office, especially if you're a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. I think we can all say about Russell Wilson. So that is still surprising. Once again, coming up in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, NBC Sports insider Ben Cross will join me. Excited for that. So one of the things I want to transition to Patrick Mahomes because he still amazes me, and more news continues to roll out of Kansas City as to what he was dealing with. And for me, I respect the athletes the most that just take accountability and don't make excuses. Because I respect those guys that go out, they do their job, they acknowledge when they played well, acknowledge when they didn't play well. Those are classy ones to me. And in his post-game remarks, he mentioned nothing about his about his toe, and now it comes out that he is reportedly going to undergo surgery to repair turf toe. Now, Mahomes and the Chiefs did a great job of pretty much brushing aside and downplaying that injury. Not once in the remarks did we hear Patrick Mahomes mention anything about a toe, anything about a hobbled foot. He didn't say anything, not a single word. And now that the player needs surgery, they said that in the playoffs, he wore a shoe half size bigger than he otherwise would. In it, the Chiefs placed a carbon fiber shank to limit the extension of the toe. So now it makes sense when you watch that Super Bowl and you're saying, wow, well, Mahomes had the second lowest quarterback rating of his career, the second lowest QBR of his career. People thought he played terribly. But if you compound that with the fact that he had no protection, his offensive line was missing 4 starters, he had just sustained a concussion under a month ago. Now it comes out he had turf toe. He's having surgery on it today. And his wide receivers drop passes that hit them in the helmet or in the hands. And we're crushing the guy. We're killing the guy because he had to run an additional 497 yards just to avoid being sacked on scrambles and dropbacks alone. Not even on actual designed runs. He ran for 497 futile yards. He was missing 4 offensive linemen, 2 Pro Bowl starters, Eric Fisher, Mathieu Schwartz. He was pressured 29 times, a Super Bowl record for the most pressures in the Super Bowl. And despite all that, he managed to throw at least two of the most impossibly great, improbable throws. I don't know if it's Houdini. I don't know if it's magic. Two of the most improbable throws I've ever seen, and it hit both of his receivers in either the hands or the helmet in the end zone. That would have been a touchdown. And it just, you saw him just sulk on the ground because, I mean, I still can't marvel enough at that pass when he's curling back, he's tripped, he's tackled, he's falling down, he's parallel to the ground, and he sidearm a perfect throw from 30 yards out right into Darrell Williams' hands, and he just can't come up with it. And otherwise, he falls into the end zone for a touchdown. I still can't believe that pass was even an incompletion. The fact that he even got that pass away. Now, I don't want to deny the greatness of Tom Brady here. This segment's not about discounting what Tom Brady's done, because this game was a tremendous accomplishment, and he is a marvel. And the way that he can galvanize troops and galvanize his teammates is the best that we've ever seen. And he should be commended for that. And he was fantastic. But to say that Mahomes played poorly or that Brady outright played Mahomes way better, we're not equitably and fairly comparing apples to apples here, because the situations and the circumstances that they both had to play under were extremely different, or entirely different. I mean, Mahomes was playing under duress the entire time. And again, now that it comes out that he had turf toe and he still ran for as many yards as he did, and he was able to scramble the way that he did, it's just remarkable. Now, the good news is that Mahomes is expected to make a full recovery and be ready for the start of next season, which no one had any real doubts about. But what I appreciate about Mahomes and the fact that this story came out now is because not a single time did we hear him reference or mention the toe, reference the offensive line, reference the previous concussion he sustained, reference guys dropping passes. He didn't make a single excuse. Not a single time did he mention this toe injury or anything else. And that is what a true leader is supposed to do. And that is what the face of your franchise, the star quarterback of the NFL, is supposed to do, is take accountability, suck it up, and you move on and allow everyone else to interpret the events that transpired post the game. And I just don't think people understand, and I hope that this story being revealed showcases the circumstances that this guy was playing under. And so when we evaluate him, when we evaluate that performance, I hope people can take a look and see what this guy accomplished under those circumstances, which are impossibly great. Finally, by the way, Tampa Bay is planning on celebrating their Super Bowl with a boat parade, just like the Tampa Bay Lightning did when they won the Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup, rather. So the boat parade going to take place on Hillsborough River along the downtown waterfront, will happen on Wednesday. And now, joining me on the show, I'm excited to introduce not only a friend, not only a colleague, but NBC Sports' Ben Cross. And Ben, as I bring you onto the show, appreciate you joining me.
Thanks for having me, John.
There are a lot of different ways that I can go with this, but I'll say this. When I was watching the Super Bowl, Ben, to me, this was the closest blowout I've ever watched in a Super Bowl, because it was one of those games where at halftime you're saying to yourself, wow, the Chiefs are only down 2 touchdowns. This doesn't seem like an insurmountable deficit. But at the same time, there was a different feel to that game. And I never felt like Mahomes had any time to get his feet set. And so to me, the outcome was a bit surprising just because I understood they were missing so many offensive linemen, but I wasn't expecting that amount of pressure to be shown by Tampa Bay. Were you at all surprised by the outcome? What were your thoughts from watching that Super Bowl on Sunday?
Well, going into the game, you obviously knew with the offensive linemen being out that the Chiefs were going to struggle to necessarily do what they normally would do, which is put up the most points you would expect in a Super Bowl or an NFL game, whatever else. But I definitely did not expect it to be that much of a detriment to the team and bring them down to that point. I do agree that it was different from most other blowouts. But if you looked at how the first half went, it was pretty clear that the Chiefs just had no answer for anything the Bucs were going to do. And you go into halftime, you think someone like Andy Reid would be able to adjust with all the weapons he has, and Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and Kelsey and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, the weapons on that offense are insane. But without that offensive line, Mahomes had to improvise. And you know what? You mentioned it. He did make some good plays under duress, and his receivers didn't give him any help at all. Not to say that Mahomes played a perfect game, but he definitely played a better game than he's been given credit for. And at the end of the day, without those offensive linemen, it just wasn't a fair matchup. Not that Tom Brady or the Bucs outdueled the Chiefs to the nth degree, but the Chiefs just couldn't get into a role, into a rhythm, and couldn't match the Bucs' intensity. The Bucs came ready to play, and to their credit, they were able to dismantle a Chiefs secondary that has been, relatively efficient in the playoffs and in the last few months. So it was a peculiar playoffs, and it was a peculiar blowout in a Super Bowl in that you go into halftime and think, oh, well, maybe there's an adjustment. But if you watch the first half, it definitely seemed like the Chiefs had a big uphill climb to go. They got the ball to start the second half, so you thought, okay, well, maybe, one touchdown and they're back in this thing. But close to the end of the third quarter, there really was nothing the Chiefs could do.
Now, to me, I still believe that Patrick Mahomes has a chance to surpass Brady as the GOAT. Obviously, Brady distanced himself a lot more after beating him in the manner and the fashion that he did. But as we just alluded to, Mahomes had no offensive line, no protection, and his receivers dropped a bunch of balls. I mean, the two passes, first of all, one to Tyreek Hill, where he's scrambling to the left and somehow is able to fling it, and it hits him in the helmet. And then the play to Darrell Williams, which I still I'm still unbelievable. It's still unbelievable to me that he even got that pass off, literally parallel to the ground, and he got that pass off, and it hits him right in the hands in the most improbable way. To me, I still feel like he's got a really good chance just because his talent is so unbelievable, and it's so obvious when he plays. And listen, this is still a guy in his first 3 years as a starter winning a Super Bowl and taking his team to 2 Super Bowls already and an NFL MVP. What did you make of Mahomes' performance, and do you think that he still can be in this GOAT conversation and maybe one day surpass Brady?
It's tough to really assess Mahomes' performance because from the get-go, he was under pressure. There wasn't much he could do. He missed some throws, but to be honest, it's tough to say whether you're going to attribute that to the pressure or whether he had a good or a bad game. As far as the legacy is concerned, it's going to be tough for him to get over Brady's mark because ultimately, and we see this in the NBA, the amount of titles you have is probably going to supersede any other argument. And I don't see Mahomes winning, 7 rings like Brady has. I mean, they certainly have the chance. But, I mean, if you look back at Russell Wilson, he won early on in his career. And then he went back to the Super Bowl the year after that, just like Mahomes did, and lost to Tom Brady. And not to say that Mahomes won't be back in the Super Bowl as Russell Wilson hasn't been. But you have to remember, just like the Seahawks teams of late, the Chiefs are going to have to keep all those parts in place. Mahomes is great, but as we saw in the Super Bowl on Sunday, if he doesn't have a ton of help, there's not a whole lot he can do. It's still a team sport. You have to keep all those people on the roster. And that's why, while Andy Reid is great, he could very well retire before Mahomes can get all those Super Bowls and build that legacy. I will say the one thing that Mahomes has going for him is I think people would give him the benefit of the doubt over Brady in that it's clear he has a better arm talent Tom Brady is more known for just being a game manager and stepping up in clutch time and ultimately being a great leader, whereas Mahomes is more like an Aaron Rodgers who just has incredible talent. He's just an incredible football player. If he can get the Super Bowls to match, I don't see there's any way that he wouldn't supersede Brady, but I don't think he's going to be able to do that. I think the team will ultimately fall apart for that, or something just goes wrong and we don't end up seeing. Because, I mean, Tom Brady is doing what few athletes have ever been able to do in their sports. And I certainly don't think anyone in football outside of maybe Mahomes has the opportunity to even pass him. So I think it's an uphill climb now. Had he beaten Brady, he definitely would be on pace to pass him eventually. But as it stands now, I think he's got a big challenge if he wants to do that.
Not to mention, I don't know if you heard, but there were sound bites that were released from the Bucs players that during the game were watching those throws and saying, "Dude, this guy number 15 is magical, man. What the? Look at that throw. How do you get that? Like when you have the opposing teammates like in the Super Bowl watching this guy making those types of comments, to me that just screams the ultimate respect. And speaking of respect, I want to transition to Brady, because one of the things that I said on Monday is that in life, one of the biggest things that we all strive for is validation. And whether it's professional validation, personal validation, that's what we seek. And to me, I thought that for Tom Brady, the biggest impetus for wanting to leave New England was because he didn't feel like he was garnering the type of respect and validation that he believed that he deserved. And I thought that was the main motivation for him wanting to win this Super Bowl, despite the fact that he's just the ultimate competitor. But really, it was that respect and that validation. To you, what do you think, in hindsight, do you think that we should be giving Brady more credit perhaps for that run in New England? And what do you think was the primary reason for the motivation for him to want to join the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and to win the Super Bowl?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I know we like to say that athletes only care about their legacy and they're making all these decisions because that's how they'll ultimately be remembered. I think that was part of it, but I think when you look at what the negotiations must have been with the Patriots last year, he wasn't going to get the contract that he felt he deserved. I'm sure if the Patriots were able to offer Brady the money and the support in drafting receivers and running backs and offensive linemen to surround him and ultimately give him a few more years of greatness, I'm sure he would have stayed. But I think the combination of the fact that it wasn't the right situation anymore in New England, he could get more support in Tampa, and look at how quickly they built the team around him. And on top of the whole legacy that he could leave if he, goes to Tampa and wins the Super Bowl, which, he did in his first season. I think those all combined certainly led to his decision. And I think if you look at his legacy as a whole, he was the greatest of all time before he left New England. Now he's in a tier alone. And until someone wins Super Bowls with multiple teams, I don't see anyone really matching that. I mean, if Mahomes passes him in Super Bowls, which, obviously we like to talk about that now, but he's got a long way to go before that happens, then maybe. But the fact that he went to two different teams and won Super Bowls, especially winning his Super Bowl in his first season. Winning a Super Bowl is something some of the greatest quarterbacks of all time have rarely done, if ever. And he has won 7 of them, one with a separate team than when he won the other 6. So it is absolutely incredible what he's done. No one in football can match it, and I don't know if anyone will honestly come close.
Quick follow-up. Do you think that this was the most impressive playoff run for a quarterback? How impressed were you by Brady this postseason at age 43 in his first year with Tampa Bay, winning 3 road games, which has only been done en route to a Super Bowl, which has only been done 4 other times? How impressive do you think that that this was? And do you think this was the most impressive postseason run by a quarterback?
I think it has to be considered one of the most impressive. I think you look at it, and the one thing that surprised me about the Bucs was how good their defense showed up in the playoffs. I think there were times in the regular season where their defense kind of folded a little bit under pressure, and Brady had to come from behind, and that's just not the type of quarterback that he is. But if you talk about Brady's play specifically, he didn't almost make any mistakes. I mean, there were a few games he threw a few interceptions, but in the playoffs he was almost perfect. And you consider the places they had to go. You generally consider those places some of the toughest places to play in football. I mean, he had to go into Lambeau and absolutely destroyed the Packers. He beat Mahomes, who is arguably the most talented player in the league at the moment. He beat Drew Brees in New Orleans against a team that had swept them in the regular season. And then he beat Washington. And I know people like to look at Washington and say, they didn't have much going on. They were playing a third string quarterback. Washington put up a fight. And, I know a lot of the Washington fans that I have as friends have mentioned how they gave him the closest fight. They're not a bad team. And I think toward the end of the year, they showed that they were competitive, and that wasn't an easy game to win either. So I think you look at it as a whole from start to finish, it has to be one of the most impressive, if not the most impressive runs by a quarterback and a team in the playoffs.
And not to mention, if you saw, the Washington football team just paid Tyler Heineke 2 years, $8.7 million, as a way to compliment him on that run.
Might be a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, but
exactly.
each his own.
And speaking of, maybe this is just kind of prisoner of the moment, but I know you're a big Cowboys fan. You're the biggest Cowboys fan that I know. Now, whether you're outwardly public about it, you've been a little quieter, a little more reserved the last couple years. But to me, Ben, when I saw that the Cowboys released this preseason hype video, sans Dak Prescott, personally, I was just, it was just disgraceful and pretty petty to me. That's kind of how it landed with me. How did it land with you?
Well, as someone who, has some experience working within a digital media team in the NFL, I worked for the Lions for an off season. I can tell you, when there is a player excluded from a video like that, there can be a multitude of reasons, but the most likely reason is they were told not to include him. Now, that could be because of a couple different things. My guess is that the negotiations behind closed doors are a little bit more heated than we are being led to believe. And while I do believe Dak will ultimately sign a deal with the Cowboys this offseason, I think their media team has ultimately been told, just stay away from it. We'll revisit it, or we can put out something else if he eventually does sign. I just believe the factors are in place for them to both want to come together on this. We'll see. Obviously, it's been pretty heated over the last year. That was before the injury. The injury, I can only imagine, adds a ton of contention into that room. So I think you look at it, and it's not a huge cause for alarm, but I definitely believe someone from the higher up told the media team to exclude Dak from the highlights. And he only played a few weeks, so I think it's semi-explainable. I obviously don't like the look of that. I think you support your guy until you know he's not your guy. But ultimately, it's business, and Jerry Jones has been very successful in some of his business ventures. Obviously, some of his player contracts haven't always worked out, but I think given the negotiations, it's very high stakes. So I can't say I'm surprised by the move.
Not to mention, just from a human element and a human standpoint, here's a guy that's been the consummate professional. He's been loyal to your franchise, led you to 2 division titles, a playoff win, and just suffers the most gruesome, devastating injury of his career. And you don't even have the decency to include him in the video. To me, again, makes perfect sense. I understand it. The buck starts and stops with Jerry, and he's not budging. So I get it. I just thought it was just pretty petty to me. All right, final question before I let you go. So in the NBA, the AllStar Game is slated to start on March 7th, I believe, in Atlanta, Georgia. And apparently, LeBron and other stars weren't consulted by Chris Paul and the Players Union and Players Association with Michelle Roberts. I understand why the league was pursuing having this All-Star Game being played, but what do you make of that situation of all of these faces of the NBA apparently kind of not being informed of this decision, this kind of being a unilateral decision without their consultation?
It's bizarre. It really is. I mean, you look at any other league, and they've either just completely eliminated the consideration of a Pro Bowl or an All-Star weekend or anything along those lines, given the situation. The NBA has been able to, I guess, get away from some of the COVID setbacks from other leagues for the most part. But the fact that they would have this and not tell some of the players is really surprising and shocking, especially when you think about how the NBA is such a player-driven league, and so much of the media and the fandom comes from following individual players. To not consult them is bizarre. It is certainly not on brand for the NBA, at least in my experience. And I think it'll have repercussions. I think you're going to see players sit out. I think you're going to see players, ultimately hold a grudge, and they've been known to do that in the past in the NBA. So I definitely think it's going to have ripple effects down the line, and I'm curious to see how it all turns out.
Yeah, I mean, you already kind of have upset them once. You coerced them into starting December 22nd due to financial reasons, and now you're upsetting them again. Just a slippery slope if you're the NBA. But I'll be curious to see if a game, in fact, is played or if more players come out and voice their frustrations. All right, Ben Cross, NBC Sports content curator and distributor, and, of course, a friend and colleague of the show. Thank you, Ben, so much.
Thanks for having me, Jonah.
All right, nice to talk with Ben Cross, good friend. Love talking sports with him. Very knowledgeable. If you don't follow him, you should on all platforms. Great guy to talk with. Okay. Speaking of, just talked about this with Ben, but I wanted to give my 2 cents on it with LeBron and the other NBA players voicing their frustrations with the NBA. So the NBA and the NBA PA apparently, again, in this cloak and dagger manner, agreed to play an All-Star game March 7th in Atlanta, Georgia. And I understand why the NBA was pushing for this, because it was reported that they lost about $1.5 billion in revenue, which amounted to about 10% of their total revenue from the 2019-2020 season. So from the NBA's perspective, I completely understand why it is that they were pushing so hard for an NBA All-Star game. I don't begrudge them at all for trying to convince Chris Paul and Michelle Roberts and the Players Association about wanting to have this game. But when you hear first De'Aaron Fox voices his frustration, all right, you want to dismiss De'Aaron Fox, fine. He hasn't been an All-Star yet, although maybe this is the year. Okay. When LeBron comes out and says he's got zero energy, zero excitement, feels like it's a slap in the face and a betrayal of trust. And Giannis says we got to follow what the big dog says. And even Kawhi voices some concerns. This is the bigger issue to me. The bigger issue is, if you're Chris Paul and you're Michelle Roberts, how do you make a unilateral decision like this? How do you not consult the faces? Or if you did consult, then you're saying that LeBron is just kind of lying about being visibly and publicly upset that he had no idea. I just don't understand how you make a decision like this, a grave decision like this, without consulting those guys, the faces of your league. So not only, as I mentioned, you coerce these guys into starting December 22nd against their will, only and exclusively because of financial reasons, but then you decide to go round 2 during a week in which they thought they were going to have some rest, thought they were going to have some time off, and instead, now they got to go out and play. Now, LeBron said he'll physically be there. Mentally, he won't be there, whatever that means. LeBron is a competitor. He's going to come out and he's going to play. But the NBA is doing whatever it can to recoup what it's lost. And then they're just trying to abscond from the players as quickly as they can in an incognito manner. It's like you don't think that the players are going to recognize what you're doing. They're very acutely aware and cognizant of what's going on. They have got complete understanding of what's going on. And so my issue, though, is if you're the NBA, this is a slippery slope, because you don't want to set this precedent moving forward of, okay, when you're strapped financially, you're going to take advantage of the players, because we're seeing the type of player empowerment in today's game, the type of influence and clout that these players can hold, not only to their franchises, to the television networks, to the NBA organization. They can just sit out and boycott if you upset them too much. So again, I don't blame the NBA for selling Chris Paul and Michelle Roberts on this. And I understand that you have some financial leverage to offer the players, because the reality is the more money that they bring in, the more revenue is split among the players. So that part's true. So the players would make more money. So that's the leverage that they have. But again, I'm just, it's surprising to me. And I'm still kind of shocked in how this all transpired, how this all unfolded, because it's just so bizarre and abnormal to see Chris Paul not even talk to one of his good friends, LeBron James, the face of the NBA, about this. So not to mention there's still a raging global pandemic. So what you're saying is let's throw all our marketable players in one location for a single night event, and let's hope that not one of them contracts COVID or had already tested positive to COVID. And then we hope that they don't infect everyone else. Imagine if all the star players in the NBA have to miss time, how much money they'll lose because people aren't going to want to tune in and watch those games on national television. So the players will be there, but it'll be begrudgingly that they'll be there. And this whole situation, again, I need more information to hear about what fully transpired before I can divulge my full opinion on it. I need to hear, was there any dialogue? Was there any communication between Chris Paul and LeBron or Giannis or any of the other players? Because right now it's all very opaque and no one is sharing anything. Okay. Finally, and then I'll transition to my Malkin's moments, final couple topics. So Steph Curry came out after the win last night over the San Antonio Spurs, dropped 32 points, a 114-91 win over the San Antonio Spurs, and said that this is the strongest that I've ever felt. The strongest that I've ever felt. And I love Curry coming out and saying this, and especially under the circumstances. Again, this is a 6-time All-Star, 6-time All-NBA player, a 2-time MVP, a unanimous MVP, a 3-time NBA champion. The guy has been balling out this year under the circumstances, 29.5 points per game, 5 rebounds, 6 assists. He's been averaging 37.5 points per game, 5 rebounds, 5 assists over his last 5 games, shooting 43% from the three-point line, 48% from the floor, 94% from the free throw line. And mind you, he's doing all of this without Klay Thompson, without his running mate. And listen, I predicted that the Warriors were going to make the playoffs. I even predicted that they would win at least one playoff series, that they'd make it to the Western Conference semifinals. And that's only going to happen if Curry continues to play like this. I love watching him play like this. He's been leading his team beautifully under these circumstances. And he said, listen, I've got a lot of energy, which is part of the reason why I feel so good. He missed pretty much the entire season last year. He broke his left hand after 4 games in the season. So yeah, he had a whole year and a half to rest up, and now he's playing like an MVP. And the Warriors are respectable. They're 13-12 now, a top 8 team in the NBA. This was a team that finished 15-50 last year with like the worst record or the second worst record in the Western Conference, either behind the Minnesota Timberwolves or one slot above. So I've been impressed with him, and I want to see him continue with all the success and continue playing so well, because when he's playing well, he's one of the most fun players in the NBA to watch. Okay, Malkin's moments. Got 2 great ones, really unique ones. First one is less unique, but I want to give this guy a shout out. Josh Hart of the New Orleans Pelicans dropped 20 points and 17 rebounds for a 6'3" guard out of Villanova, 4th-year player, initially drafted with the Lakers. That was a career high 17 rebounds for Josh Hart in the 130-101 win over the Houston Rockets. Again, this is a 6'3" guard. We knew he was a good rebounding guard, but 17 points, 17 rebounds he gives you, combined with 20 points and good defense, played a team-high 40 minutes last night. Major shout-out to Josh Hart. But this is my favorite Malkin's moment. And I remember when Randy Arozarena raced a horse in the offseason. Well, The Buccaneers general manager, Jason Licht, apologies for the mispronunciation, announced that linebacker Devin White took a celebratory ride around Raymond Jones Stadium on his horse. Devin White rode around the Tampa Bay Buccaneers Stadium on his horse, and he said to him, "You earned it, cowboy. Giddy up." And boy, did Devin White giddy up. 12 tackles, an interception in that Super Bowl. Had a tremendous run this postseason. And I just love stories like that. Well, that's all the time that I got for you today. Thank you so much for joining me on Morning Joe every Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitch TV, Twitter, and on YouTube. As always, have a lovely rest of your morning.